Hello, everyone. Happy Thursday. And as promised, today is lesson 2 of Unit 9, which is over the Enlightenment Philosophes. And so when you see that word every year, I have students be like, Miss Latham, you spelled philosopher wrong. And I'm like, no, I didn't. So they are known as the Enlightenment Philosophes. That's just the French word for philosopher. And it's because many of them were French. And just academically, you still call them that. But yes, they were philosophers. Like, okay, let's stop trying to speak French, right? But and they were philosophers, but just to kind of get that out of the way. All right, so the Enlightenment, right? I said on Monday or whatever day that y'all saw me on the video, that really without this shift in intellectual thought and progression, you wouldn't have seen what the up and coming revolutions that we're about to start seeing in our units and in our lessons. I mean, the American Revolution arguably would have never happened had it not been for the ideas of the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment may not have happened if it weren't for the ideas presented from the scientific revolution. So, all of these things stem off of each other. I mean, it's all this ripple effect, right? And, the Enlightenment philosophers, philosophes, however you want to say it, are incredibly important to world history, because you have to understand, like, prior to their ideas, most political systems at the time, of course, were monarchy based, or some type of kind of authoritarian base. And now you look around the world, and of course, like most, if not many governments, are democratic based. And I'm not saying all, there's still plenty of countries out there that are not, but I mean, that it changes the entire political dynamic of the world when you start looking at, kind of like the general will of the people, and not the general will of this one person whose family has always been in control and who God blessed. I mean? Like, so it just totally shifts society, culture, all the things. So the philosophers start to say, okay, let's take off the veil where we look at everything through our faith, right? And through our Christianity, which is something that should be, if you've been watching any of my lessons, like kind of earth shattering. Everything up until this point has been looked at through, okay, Christianity first, my faith first, my trade second, my nation second. Like everything is intertwined with religion. And all of a sudden, that's not how people are thinking anymore. Now all of a sudden it's let's look at things not with that at all, and let's look at things only with reason and logic. And this is how you see that big shift. Your philosophes were coming from your nobility and your middle class, because of course those are the people with educations. And it's kind of hard to like question everything and create new and progressive ways of politics and societal structure if you can't like write and read. So that's the part of society they're coming out of. And again, it's question everything, critically think about how we could change things. Again, not just the way we see the universe, but the way we see how our own nation is ran, the way we look at, how we view even the person standing right next to us. Literally like question everything, critically think about everything when it comes to society. So Montesquieu is the first philosophe up to bat, French, and he studies England in the 1700s. And of course, if you'll remember from last unit, Glorious Revolution of 1688 sets England up as a constitutional monarchy. And they have these differing branches of government because of that. And he starts to study like how they interact and actually like defines them. They're just kind of over there like doing what they do, but he goes in and says, no, like you have like these, if you look at how your system is set up now, you've got like this branch and this branch and this branch, and they all work together. Well, he calls them the executive branch, which was the monarch in England, and then the legislative branch, which of course was Parliament, the House of Commons and the House of Lords, and then the judicial branch, which was the courts of law. And he says, look, like this is incredible. You all work together independently, but yet at the same time with each other, like, and not there, you've set it up to where there isn't one particular branch that has more power than the other. And this was, of course, the checks and balances of the separation of powers. And this is his most lasting contribution, because this is how, of course, our founding fathers set up our government, and how many governments are now set up, because it's a good model, right? So, of course, in the United States, our executive branch is the president and his cabinet. Our legislative branch is the Senate and the House of Representatives. And then our judicial branch is the Supreme Court. And they can't operate without each other. Okay, they have to operate, and work all together in order for this grand, what I like to call, political experiment of ours to work. I mean, and at the end of the day, that is what the United States is, or was. I mean, and it still is. I mean, we are the greatest and most successful political experiment to have ever happened. Our founding fathers took these men's publishings and ideas and truly formed a new government that had never really existed ever before. I mean, yes, like parts of our government had existed here and there, like in differing forms. But I mean, truly, if you look at how we are set up, that hadn't existed prior to us. And so, we are really something to be highly proud of, because we are the best and most successful political experiment. It's kind of fun. All right. So Voltaire, another French philosophe, becomes a big celebrity really in his day. And he is known the most for criticizing the church and criticizing Christianity. He is openly critical, so much so that he ends up getting exiled from France because of it. But and the only reason why the church really doesn't grab him and kill him is because of his celeb status, but also because he's got friends in high places. Like, people like to hear Voltaire come and speak. He's interesting. He's funny. He's charismatic. And like his best friend's the King of Austria. So, I mean, like, again, like kind of friends in high places. That's where he goes when he gets exiled. And anyways, listen to some of these quotes. God is a comedian playing to an audience that is too afraid to laugh. He's talking about the church in this quote when he says, those who can make you believe absurdities can make you commit atrocities. That's being very highly critical of the church. Okay, so yeah, all of the Enlightenment thinkers are all like, let's get rid of looking at the world through the lens of religion, but nobody else was really on board with that just yet. I mean, it's still the 18th century, it's still the 1700s, everybody. So, the church does still have power. Your monarchs do still have power. And of course, the two are very intertwined still. And the church is still a very big part of everyday life. So, naturally he's going to get exiled, and there's going to be some type of slap on the wrist. But he championed a new religious philosophy that was coming about at the time, known as deism. Deism is basically like, okay, there is a God, but they don't believe that any of the articles of faith, okay, so like, or the institutional religions like Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, Hinduism, they don't believe that any of those things are necessarily true, right? They're saying those are stories that have been, kind of written down to try and explain our own existence so that human beings can feel like safer or feel like they have more control, right? That goes back all the way to when we talked about the original religions forming during, like the Mesopotamian regions and the beginnings of civilization. So deists basically say that all of the religions, that they all boil down to that. Is there a God? Yes. Do we know their story? No. And so that's basically a deist's viewpoint. Sometimes a deist will call, God, God, or the creator, or the clockmaker, or a supreme being. But regardless, they do believe in a higher power. They just don't know what the story is behind it. And so he's a big champion of this. And usually there's a big misunderstanding actually about our founding fathers. There's this huge misunderstanding that all of our founding fathers are these like deeply Christian people. That's not true. Had they been overzealously and deeply Christian, we wouldn't have had separation of church and state, right? They wouldn't have been pushing the boundaries of separating the two and trying to create, very clear and defined boundaries there. Many of our founding fathers were deists. A lot of your very brilliant Enlightenment philosophical thinkers are deists. So, anyways, the video in the next slide is just a quick little like 3-minute video of a professor from Clemson, actually, who does a great job of kind of panning in the background from a church to the woods and kind of trying to explain how deists would also kind of practice their faith. Like, okay, so if you're a deist, like, what do you do? A lot of it just had to do with, I believe in the logic and the nature around me. And so they would oftentimes try to go and just kind of almost like meditate in a way, but not really. Like, I don't know. He describes it better than I do. So, but before you get to that, Diderot is like the original Google. That's what I like to call Diderot. He compiles the first ever set of encyclopedias, like books of basic knowledge. And, and you have to understand, y'all have no clue what it's like, because you've had the internet your entire life, to go into a library and actually look up the encyclopedia, find the right one based on the alphabet, grab it, and then also sift through the pages of, alphabetically trying to find what you're looking for. When I was little, that's how we got our information. I'll never forget our elementary and middle school libraries, that was like the big bookshelves were just stacks of encyclopedias, because that's how you got your information. Those were our Googles, prior to, of course, the internet and search engines. And so he's the one that started that. He's the one that created the first volume collection of encyclopedias. So it's kind of neat. He's the original Google. Okay. So Adam Smith is the most famous economist that comes out of this time frame. And he's like kind of the father of capitalism, also known as laissez-faire economics. And it's all about the government does not need to get involved in the market. Okay. And that's capitalism. It's the idea that you should have a free market, which is what laissez-faire basically stands for. It's free market economy. You need to allow for people to freely exchange money, freely exchange business without the government getting involved. And that this is part of what has made America, of course, so successful, and why people still clamor to get in here. We have, the most successful free market economy in the world almost. We're getting maybe a little surpassed here and there, but for the most part, we really do. And it's because we're capitalist based. Our founding fathers were like, as far as economics goes, this is the model that we want here. We want a laissez-faire market. We want a free market. The government, if you want to start a bricklaying company, is not going to tell you no. If you want to go, start your, do your own business, or become, hey, when you're little, you always get asked by a teacher, what do you want to be when you grow up? Well, there's a lot of places in the world where that conversation doesn't happen. And it's not like, oh, I want to be an astronaut. Well, okay, you will be an astronaut someday. Yeah, that doesn't happen. That conversation doesn't happen in a lot of other places. It happens in a lot of places, but not, but again, like, we're the poster child for, like, free market economy really doing a bang up job. So Adam Smith says that there really should only be three basic roles of the government, and that is protect society from invasion, so like keep a standing army, defend citizens from injustice, so obviously have some type of judicial court system, and then keep up the infrastructure, keep up the roads, keep up the bridges, so that obviously movement can happen. Because you need, in order to have a free market and a solid trade system, you need people moving around. So those are the three things he said that the government should be involved in, and that's it. And so if you're more of like a hands-off thinker in terms of the government, like the government should actually have like less control, less regulation, you are much more of like an Adam Smith minded guy or girl. So next up is Jean-Jacques Rousseau, also French. And he is really probably the most famous of the philosophes because of the social contract. He writes this in 1762. And of course, this is like the big whoa moment that will really kind of spark the idea of revolution. He writes that the concept that an entire society agrees to be governed by its general will, and all individuals should then, abide by that general will, was something, again, pretty like earth shattering, because you have to consider the fact that everybody had not had, no one had been governed by their own general will. It was the general will of whoever their king was, and really the church. That was the general will that they were living under, right? So the idea that like an entire society's general will is what the government should be based on, what? Like, that was unheard of. He's essentially saying, hey guys, like, power in numbers here. I mean, if you don't like what it is that's governing you as an entire society, you have the ability to change that. And so, and then you have the ability to create whatever government it is that you want, because if that's the general will of the people, then that's the government that will be sustained. And, huge. And obviously, if you just listen to the sentence that I said, that's at the root, right, of democracy. So, he writes this and publishes this in 1762. And of course, it's no coincidence that our Declaration of Independence happens July 4th, 1776. Our founding fathers had read the social contract, were of course incredibly taken by it and emboldened by it, and started to think really outside the box, right, politically, and go, yeah, why don't we do this? And another thing that makes Rousseau a little bit more famous than his counterparts, and I think it's what endeared him more to readers, is he brought emotion into the fold, right? A lot of your philosophes very much looked at everything in almost kind of a robotic way, right? Like reason, logic, reason. Well, I mean, at the end of the day, we are still emotional beings. Like, we don't look at every single thing only with reason and logic. We look at many things with our hearts. And he had a great way of kind of bridging those two components in his work. He was good at saying, yes, like reason and logic are really important, but so are the emotions that drive us, that the two go together. And so I think that's also what made him a little bit more endearing. All right, so this is a boss of a woman. Mary Wollstonecraft was amazing. She wrote A Vindication of the Rights of Women during the time of the Enlightenment. And what is so great is, here are all of these Enlightenment thinkers, these men saying, okay, we've got to, change things, and a monarch should not have power just because that's the way that it's always been. Like, we need to change that up, and it should be the will of the people. And of course, women, specifically Mary Wollstonecraft, were like, oh, okay, hi, are we going to completely change society and really like progress? Oh, women would love to get on board with that. Like, that sounds great. And all of these Enlightenment thinkers, or not all of them, but many of them were like, yeah, not you though. Hey, you girls, like, no, you need to still just get married and have babies. Like, that's your job. And Mary Wollstonecraft in her book basically argued, well, isn't that a little hypocritical? Like, come on, you're sitting here saying that monarchs shouldn't have power just because that's always been the way, but yet you're going to turn around and tell women that men should have power over women just because that's always been the way. Mm-mm. And so again, that's why I started this particular slide with like, here's a boss. She argued for women's equal rights in education, economic and political life, and again was very vocal about women also being on the ground floor of societal change. Unfortunately, as you all know, women don't really see hardcore rights in politics, unfortunately, for another really 200 years. But, we really don't see the movement of women gaining political rights until, like the early 1900s. Women don't get the vote in the United States until 1920. So, but hey, we got to have the women that started to begin with and said, women should be just as equally educated. Women should be able to do these things. So go Mary Wollstonecraft. All right. How did all of this spread about, right? Like, how do you get all of these ideas spread? Okay. Well, as you all know, we've talked about this before. Hello, printing press. But you also see the creation of newspapers in the 1700s. For example, the first daily newspaper in London was printed in 1702. And you start to see not just daily newspapers, but weekly newspapers, periodicals, things like that. And of course, they're all being printed in vernacular language, so everyday speech, so everybody can read them. And so all of these ideas start to spread through these publications. But in addition to that, you have the salon of the Enlightenment. And a lot of people, obviously nowadays, when you hear the word salon, you think, oh, you're getting your hair done, or you're getting your nails done, or whatever it is that you're doing. And that's not the salon of the Enlightenment era. That's not what I'm talking about. The salon were people's, sorry, my earring messed up. The salon were people's living rooms, basically, is what a salon was. It says the elegant urban drawing rooms. That's wealthy people's living rooms is what they're saying. And, living rooms today, of course, are couches and TVs and where everybody, comes and watches their Netflix shows. That wasn't the case then because we didn't have TV, right? So this is where you had chairs, lined up all over the room. You had couches, you had tables. And this is where people would come and read. The family would come down and they would read, and they'd sit by the fire and they'd discuss things. They'd talk, maybe the lady would sit there and sew or, draw or paint or, what. I mean, this is like the general kind of meeting room of the house. It's the living room. But in addition to it being kind of the living area for these people, it was also where they host like high tea, right? If you're in England, this is where they had high tea. This is where they basically would have had like happy hour, okay, cocktail parties. That's what we're gonna call them nowadays. But this is where they would have people over. I mean, if you've ever been at your home when your parents have friends over, everybody's standing around in the living room talking, chit-chatting. That's what they're doing. And, also, I'm sure if you've had your parents' friends over, when they're all there, they're sitting around and a lot of times talking about politics and talking about the world around them at the time. It's the same thing. It's the same thing going on during the 1700s. You have educated people having get-togethers, having tea, having cocktails, or more like wine and beer. But and they're just sitting around visiting about, hey, have you seen what Voltaire wrote? Hey, have you seen the latest periodical that, Montesquieu put out? Hey, have you seen some of Diderot's new encyclopedias? Like blah, 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 blah. And that's how people start to disseminate information. It's the same as me standing around on the weekends with my friends going, hey, did you see that latest, I don't know, like news article or news video on, this or that? I mean, it's the same type of situation. So clearly, if you have these enlightened thinkers and their ideas starting to spread because of the prints and because of the parties and get-togethers and such, then that idea of, again, that veil of Christianity kind of coming off of people and looking at politics and society without having your religion involved starts to get, seep in. And so this is why you see society become more and more secular, which is, like without religion. You're able to look at things without your religion being the main thing that you filter everything through. And so society becomes more secular. And of course, governments are going to become more secular because of this. I mean, our founding fathers made sure that we had separation of church and state because that was a very enlightened viewpoint of politics. Like, we don't need the church involved in politics. And I think that's a brilliant concept. I think, religion, even if it is in its most pure form, can get messy. I mean, there's a reason why your parents always tell you, there's three things you don't talk about. You don't talk about religion, politics, or money if you don't want to, if you want to try to maintain equal footing with somebody. So, again, like even in its most innocent forms and purest forms, it could get messy. Okay, so moving on to just kind of talking about the arts of the time. Architecturally, everybody wanted to be Versailles. That's the long and the short of architecture during, the Enlightenment era, the 18th century. It was, oh my gosh, Versailles is awesome. I want to be as opulent and amazing as it. Art. Now, this is kind of interesting. If you'll notice, a lot of the artwork that I've ever shown you during eras that we've talked about has been very religious based, right? Like the disciples or Jesus on the cross or Mary with child or, the Madonna and child. Like it's all religiously based. And now we have like a chick on a swing. So, I mean, that just goes to show you, again, like even in art, you have a movement away from everything being religious based or having some type of religious undertone. And everything kind of gets a little bit more free and airy and happy and, a little bit pushing the boundary of propriety even. So, again, it's a movement towards new ways, new times. And a lot of people view this as exciting, and happy. And that's good after the 1600s, right? Like the 1600s were rough. We need some happy. So the scientific revolution and Enlightenment are definitely that. Music. I mean, come on. You can't talk about the 18th century music scene without talking about Mozart. Mozart truly was a child prodigy. He was composing his own music at at the age of my second grader. He was literally going around and giving concerts of his own composed music by the age of 10. I mean, it was crazy what the kid was capable of. Again, at a very young age, truly musical child prodigy. I'm not a big classical music person. I sound like I sit around in my car and listen to classical music and listen to Mozart, but I appreciate what he did for music. I mean, some of his work is some of the most iconic classical pieces that if you hear it, you're like, oh yeah, I know what that is. Oh, it's Mozart. And so, very, very influential to the progression of music. And music has its own amazing history as well, and he's a big part of that. So this is just a quick little bio on him. He dies at 35, and again, it's only 3 minutes or so. And that is it. That's the end of lesson 2 in the Enlightenment. Tomorrow in class, we're going to be watching just a real quick overview of the Enlightenment and then taking the formative assessment. So I will post the video that we watch so that you guys can watch it, and then you'll need to take your formative online as well. So that's it for this week. You won't see me again until next week when I do lesson 3, which will be, of course, we have those block schedules on Monday and Tuesday. So you will probably see the video from me for lesson 3 Monday at the end of the day. So if you have any questions, as always, please feel free to email me, and y'all have an awesome weekend. So see you later. Bye.